Hi. Thanks for joining us for our Eastside Bible reading for the week of May 31st through June 6th, 2020. We get into a portion of 1 Chronicles, chapters 22 through 29, that might prove a little difficult reading because of the seemingly endless list of names and duties that are contained in those chapters. But it's really quite important because it tells us of the preparations that David made not only for orderly temple worship and the upkeep of the temple, but also for the organization of his secular kingdom, the kingdom of Israel. And it tells us of just how seriously David took his duties towards God and towards his country. And we're fortunate that the chronicler saved these or preserved these for us because this information isn't given to us in 1 Samuel. As we move into 1 Kings, chapter 1 prepares us for David's demise. It relates to us how he had gotten old and prepares us for the installation of Solomon, his son, as his successor. And before Solomon is officially crowned king, there is palace intrigue and conspiracy that are detailed for us. But eventually he's crowned king after finally dealing bloodily with his half-brother Adonijah and with Joab, David's once faithful general. We read about an alliance that Solomon formed by marriage with Pharaoh of Egypt by marrying the daughter of the Pharaoh of Egypt. And it troubles us a little because we know later on the trouble that marrying foreign or pagan women is going to pose for Solomon. But on the other hand, in these early chapters of Solomon's rule, we see Solomon's sincerity in asking God for wisdom and how God grants it. And then we saw an example of that wisdom in an actual court case that Solomon ruled over. And finally, in our reading in 1 Kings, we see Solomon's wise organization of his growing kingdom and elaborate descriptions of his vast wealth, power, and wisdom. And we get to the New Testament as we move through Romans. We continue to see what a game changer faith is as Paul reminds us not only of the terrible consequences of Adam's sin, but also the wonderful heavenly benefits of the righteous act of Jesus. And then he reminds us of the necessity and the importance of baptism as we present ourselves as obedient servants to God. Then he begins to move into a practical discussion of justification by faith by reminding us that faith is manifested by what we do with our bodies. And he'll continue this discussion more in chapters 12 and following of Romans, which we'll get into later on. But in chapter 9, he kind of begins a lament anyway, over his fellow Jews for their continued reliance on the law. And this is a discussion that Paul will continue all the way through chapter 11 before he picks up again on what he began in chapter 8. As we look at the Psalms this week, Psalms 42 and 43 really should be read together because together they form a prayer of vindication for the psalmist during a time when God seemed very far away for the psalmist. Psalm 78 is a historical song. It's a long psalm, but it contrasts God's mighty works with Israel's habitual unfaithfulness. There are lessons in that psalm to learn. Finally, as Proverbs is introduced, it really goes hand in hand with our reading about Solomon, since Solomon wrote so many of the Proverbs. Proverbs begins as wise fatherly instruction that centers on reverence for God and relying on Him as the source of all wisdom. There's a lot to take in this week in our Eastside Bible reading. I hope that you're keeping up with it. Hope that we'll see you again in another summary of our Eastside Bible reading. Thanks for joining us. God bless you.